if I had already graduated, I would be interested.
Yeah, yeah, no,
It seems
it's
like a really cool. I mean, a lot of work, but
right, exactly. But that's the hope. Is that it's
games, baseball games, jerseys.
yeah, that's what I want you to think. Nothing but. Although
Nothing but
now
fun.
I need to get my Red Sox jersey.
I don't even wear my
Um, so, I think about a bunch of the candidates were here, in Boston. Those are the other thing that makes it a little difficult. Some of them really connect with Boston education, playing school and sports. We have three people who come to kind of the Bay Area who spent time there and worked here, but again, a few years away. Us two are kind of in contact.
Yeah, they're just not
Yeah.
as
So,
networked in.
exactly.
That's important.
I know, yeah, no, it is. It's definitely a factor. It just makes it a chance to have success or well, so, and some people have done a lot of kind of startup stuff. A couple candidates less startup experience. So it's,
When are you trying to hire them by?
yeah, of course. Ideally, ideally, bring someone on board in November. Because there's just so much stuff that's so,
And how are things going in the Bay Area? I mean, are you going to start going and doing recruitment stuff?
a lot of the recruiting will go heavy kind of in January. Yeah, I mean,
That makes sense.
I'm actually really focused now on this.
Yeah.
And that's what all this spring. I mean, and we've always been working with some possible kind of funders and some possible partners in doing that kind of thing, but I really want to get someone on board. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
but I'm optimistic about getting someone really good. So we'll back to our dinner. But
Yeah.
it's kind of a fun thing for our organization. The more I spend time here, the more excited I get.
I mean, I haven't actually been that looked into it either.
Right. Yeah.
But
Right.
there definitely there was actually like a happy hour the other night that I could go to last night actually. I'm like, I don't even know when, but it was like the education people,
Okay.
across the street.
Oh,
People
right.
visit. It was like the business.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so
Yeah.
last year they tried to have one or two of them, and I didn't really ever feel like I really got to know a bunch of people.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it was just too, like, the setting. I mean, we were in some loud bar, and there was, just this long table, and, like, we didn't really, it just wasn't very nice.
How's everything going? Pretty focused on school right now.
So,
Killing it.
I'm TAing a class, and it's like 25 hours a month. It's a really heavy work class.
What class?
It's our leadership course.
Oh, yeah.
That one.
The one you really like.
Yeah. It's an awesome class. I mean, it's really good experience TA, but it's just like,
Between that and classes.
I mean, I haven't had any time. It was, in fact, yesterday I was trying to revise like my resume to
Yeah.
add like the summer stuff on, and I haven't even done that yet. I don't even have like my resume ready to give to someone.
Right.
So I need to kind of get on it.
Good.
There's sorry,
No, go ahead. There's an
awesome sounding. Did I tell you this on the phone? It's the Broad Foundation Residency.
Yep.
The 2-year program.
Yep.
I mean,
know all about them. Yeah.
what do you think? I want to hear what you think of that program.
Oh, I think it's a great program. I think it's interesting things now. They're starting a summer residency program, placing people in superintendent's offices.
Maybe so they're
So there's-
doing that because like that could be something that you could maybe just look into.
Yeah, that's what we're going to try and collaborate. I've been talking to them for a while.
Are they stealing your
Well,
ideas?
I don't want to know.
You're not going to say that about a huge funder.
Exactly. No, there's definitely some collaborative possibilities.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And their thing that's different is that they're going to be like one summer person in each city in the superintendent's office. That's what I would think.
outside candidates.
Exactly.
So it makes me wonder.
But I'm just looking at who they end up with, and it looks very heavily.
Oh,
I mean, everyone. So, right, exactly. And there's someone who started this.
Now it's beyond what we do in the hospital. So that's on my to-do list for tonight, in addition to and getting ready.
I'm in the same boat. We're in the same boat, sister. Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'm glad to meet someone
already
who's
saw
got
that,
the same workload as me. I'm feeling like I have more than everybody else.
I mean, that,
So at least
it'd be open.
It's normal and it's terrible.
Because they should change. I really think they should change their description.
I'm with
They're
you.
really not.
I think it's really not 100%. But Seaport's fun.
Business world.
yeah,
And
I'm
say
looking
that
forward to it.
This is the mission.
So this is my like last minute preparation. I just got a class.
And they say they're looking
I skipped that big part. I just have too much to do.
I doubt that they could find it.
And
That sounds a little bit.
discussion sessions, like you said,
Familiar.
discussion
I mean,
sessions.
you're not in this situation. Shit, when I talk about your channel,
That was the message you're supposed to pass along.
I don't know if I'm gonna like pay for that at some point or not. I
way
just
too much education.
haven't even.
Especially time.
I think it's mandatory.
Yeah. Probably go talk to them.
I get the impression that it's
Like, they should.
Well, it's just
I don't
once I got my
really like
schedule,
that
it's like I don't know.
philosophy that just
I
pure
agree that they
business
just sprung it up on us and we were doing
I mean, I understand the point. Hard business skills.
No, I mean I just sort of always think of that punch line.
So, that would be-
other things.
Good evening, everybody. Let me try that again. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. All right, wake up, wake up. All right. Welcome our guests. Come from, particularly one has come from a very long, long way. All the way from darkest LA. So, we have to make things feel good. Let's thank our co-sponsors, Politics. Thank you. Can you hear me now? The Institute of Politics, the Harvard Black Men's Forum, the Harvard Black Student Association, and the Kennedy School Black Student Caucus. And signed copies of Birth of a Nation will be available for purchase at the Harvard Bookstore. Okay? Now, with that out of the way, I can now proceed to welcome you to our panel. In Birth of a Nation, a comic novel, a radical group called the New African People's Party is distracted momentarily from planning a protest of the stolen presidential election by the arrival of a plate of piping hot chocolate chip cookies. Disenfranchisement and anger are one thing, dessert is quite another. Now, such ridiculous but sublimely real juxtapositions are at the heart of Aaron McGruder, Reginald Hudlin, and Kyle Baker's new graphic novel. The book, ladies and gentlemen, is simply hilarious. Some examples, other than the cookie-hoarding militants. A national anthem sung to the tune of the Good Times theme from TV, a soon-to-be foreign minister who hits on women at Planned Parenthood, a global energy crisis almost created and then narrowly avoided by a scooter-riding nerd from MIT, and my buddy, Cornell West, teaching an elementary school class and assigning Ishmael Reed's Mumbo Jumbo for homework. But the book is also dead serious, not the least because the presidential election looms in reality 6 days from now. Birth of a Nation bitingly satirizes what went wrong in the 2000 election, the ugly disenfranchisement of too many African American voters in Florida. Even one disenfranchisement, of course, would be one too many. The chaos and anger that ensued, the cynical selection of the president in the name of averting instability and constitutional crisis. But it also doesn't let any of us off the hook when it imagines what would happen if a disenfranchised community tried to take back what was stolen from it. Here, the blacks in the mythical community of East St. Louis, led by their noble mayor, Fred Fredericks, secede from the nation and bring the United States to the brink of civil war after the erasure of their right to vote swings the presidency, surprise, surprise, to the right-wing Governor Caldwell of the great state of Texas. What we all learn from the secession is that people have to be willing to fight for their rights and sometimes to die for their liberty. It's an old sentiment, to be sure, but an unavoidable one. After all, freedom and liberty haven't traditionally jumped into the laps of black people in this country. Now, I won't give away the ending of the book, and I wish I knew the ending of next week's coming drama, but there is no better time than now. Excuse me. There is no better time than now, tonight, to talk about this book, to talk about the black vote and how it matters, to talk about where democracy has gone wrong in the past 4 years and where it might go in the next 4 years. And that's why we've invited you to join us this evening for this great panel. I'm going to introduce Reginald Hudlin first, and then all the other panelists in alphabetical order. I'll sit down, Reggie will speak, then they'll all speak in alphabetical order, and then we'll open it up for questions from all you all. Reginald Hudlin is the co-author with Boondocks creator Aaron McGruder of Birth of a Nation, a comic novel. Birth of a Nation marks the second collaboration of Mr. Hudlin and Mr. McGruder. They have already worked together to develop an animated series based on the Boondocks, which will air on the Cartoon Network in 2005. Mr. Hudlin is a major presence in Hollywood, having directed such box office successes as House Party, which we've all seen. His directorial debut was based on a short film that he directed while he was a student here at Harvard. Boomerang, BB's Kids, the first African-American animated film feature, The Great White Hype, and Ladies Band. He has directed many of the top African-American stars, including Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock, Samuel L. Jackson, Damon Wayans, Jamie Foxx, and Halle Berry. With his brother Warrington, who was at Yale with me, Reggie is the founder of the Hudlin Brothers Epic Soundtracks record label. House Party has become a franchise spawning 3 sequels, a Saturday morning cartoon, and even a comic book. He graduated from Harvard College in 1983. Michael Dawson. Michael C. Dawson is professor of government and African American studies here at Harvard. He's the author of Behind the Mule, Race and Class in African American Politics, and a second book, Black Visions, The Roots of Contemporary African American Political Ideologies. Michael Dawson was co-principal investigator of the 1988 National Black Election Study and was principal investigator with Ron Brown of the 1993-1994 National Black Politics Study. Along with Professor Lawrence Bobo of the Departments of Sociology and Afro, he is working on a project that explores the racial divide in the electorate at the time of the 2000 presidential election. He is also the co-editor of a riveting new journal, which I commend to all of you and advise you to subscribe to if you can, or at least pick it up in the library, entitled The Du Bois Review. It is the first serious social sciences review dedicated to the study of race that's been published in a long, long time. Michael Flaherty is the co-founder of Walden Media, which produces and develops films, television, theater, and interactive media, and accompanying teaching resources that are both entertaining and educational for children. Before co-founding Walden Media, Mr. Flaherty built a solid local and national reputation as a passionate education reformer. In Boston, he designed a curriculum that increased the percentage of minority students gaining entrance to the city's elite prep schools by more than 1,000% in 6 months. Mr. Flaherty then went on to co-found the Frederick Douglass Charter School in Boston. It's easy to see why the local and national media have praised him, with the Boston Globe and the Wall Street Journal referring to him as an entrepreneur in education extraordinaire. And last, no, not last, next to last. Next to last, and certainly not least, Lonnie Guinier. Lonnie Guinier is the Bennett Bosky Professor of Law at the Harvard Law School, where she became the first African-American woman tenured professor there in 1998. A longtime and frequently heard advocate of equality and voting rights and political representation, she is the author of The Tyranny of the Majority, Fundamental Fairness and Representative Democracy, Lift Every Voice, Turning a Civil Rights Setback into a New Vision of Social Justice, and with Gerald Torres, a group of lectures which she gave at Harvard under the rubric of the Du Bois Lectures, published as The Miner's Canary: Enlisting Race, Resisting Power, Transforming Democracy. In the 1980s, Professor Guinier helmed the Voting Rights Project at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She has co-created 2 online forums for the discussion of race, gender, and community engagement, and they are racetalks.org and minerscanary.org. And now, last but not least, the Reverend Eugene F. Rivers III. Reverend Eugene F. Rivers III is the pastor of Azusa Christian Community, a Pentecostal church affiliated with the Church of God in Christ and located in Dorchester. He is a tireless and visible advocate for educational and faith-based opportunities for urban youth. Co-founder of the Boston 10-Point Coalition and the president of the renowned Ella J. Baker House, Reverend Rivers has built a national program for reform out of his Boston roots with the National 10-Point Leadership Foundation, which aims to build new grassroots leadership in inner cities around the country by the year 2006. Like Reggie, Gene is a Harvard man and a former fellow of the Center for the Study of Values in Public Life at the Divinity School. He is contributing editor to Sojourners magazine and appears frequently as both writer and interview subject in the national press. In June 1998, he was the subject of a Newsweek cover story, God versus the Gangs. He is also the co-founder of the W.E.B. Du Bois Society, which brings talented and highly motivated high school students to Harvard on Saturdays for a seminar with Gene, with his wife, and with the Harvard faculty. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Kennedy School our distinguished panelists.
Hey, y'all. I'm not standing because they told me not to stand, so don't feel disrespected. Thank you all for coming. This is fantastic to be back. I want to thank the Kennedy School for having us, for the Du Bois Institute, and Skip for putting this together, for the panelists for also showing up, and last but not least, my pastor, Eugene Rivers. I owe him a great deal throughout my life, and this goes yet another in the debt column. I don't know how many people here have had a chance to actually read the book. If not, it's on sale. But I thought what we might start with is reviewing the broad outlines of the story, show you guys some of the images in the book, and then we can launch into the conversation from there. I mean, some people wonder why I did the whole thing in the first place. Obviously, normally I make movies, but I'm really interested in being a storyteller. And I like to work in whatever medium is appropriate. The idea for Birth of a Nation is something I've been kicking around in my head for quite some time. I'm originally from East St. Louis. Did you call it a mythical community? That did not slip past me. It may not be mythical, but it is legendary. I don't know if anyone here is from East Boogie, but you may be from any of its sister cities, like Gary, Indiana, Newark, New Jersey, Compton. Like Ward said, the world's a ghetto. And but when it comes to ghettos, East St. Louis is an extraordinary place. It's the kind of place where when you hit the city limits, there's a big metal detector. And they check to see if you have a knife or a gun. And if you don't have one, they give you one. Because they believe in a fair fight in East St. Louis. They're not going to just put you out there. but you know, I can say this coming from East St. Louis, and it's true for myself, it's true for Miles Davis, it's true for Jackie Joyner, any number of people who came from that place, or still there. There's a tremendous amount of pride in East St. Louis. People love the city, they're very proud of the city, except for Jimmy Connors. He says he's from Belleville. He's from East St. Louis. But everyone else, you know, is more than happy to claim the fact that they're from East St. Louis, Illinois, not St. Louis, Missouri. You have to remember, Illinois was a free state, Missouri was a slave state, and all these things fall from that. It's always been an incredibly poor city. Right now, probably half the city is on some form of public assistance. Incredible, I mean, every horrible statistic you can imagine about a ghetto is true. But there's a never say die attitude about the place, which I certainly grew up with. I got it from my parents who, you know, were and still are very active in trying to change the community. So when I, you know, even when I became, you know, a young adult, you know, came to Harvard here, you know, went on to Hollywood to make films, the idea of somehow having that Tobacco Road fantasy of making myself a success and taking the money and the resources that I got out in the world back home and transforming the place was never too far from the back of my mind. But what you realize is that these problems are systemic. These problems are national. That you have NAFTA and you have all these other bigger issues, and you know the shift. You know, where there's no factories in America, let alone in East St. Louis. So how are you going to open a factory there once the ones that were there close? So you realize that the solution is going to take radical approach. So after a while, I read a while, and I realized that secession would probably be the solution. And it's, again, you know, as absurd as it sounds, the book tries to comedically, but with some sincerity, make the case for it. And even if you ultimately dismiss it as not realistic, the point is, you know, think out the box, try other solutions, which is what's so great about this group, because, you know, I just tell jokes for a living. These people are genuinely smart. So perhaps in the course of this evening, some genuinely smart solutions will come about.
Or some smart jokes.
Or, yeah, in either case. Let's start looking at some of the images from the book. That's the cover, and that's the first page, which is St. Louis at the top panel, which is a lovely city. And then below it, East St. Louis, which is not so lovely. You know, it's about 35,000 people. It's literally the blackest city in America. It's like 98.6% black. There's a couple of white people who could not afford to leave. But everyone else there is black, and they're not doing so well. The story revolves around the mayor, Fred Fredericks. Fred is our Jimmy Stewart character. He's a well-meaning, hard-working brother who believes in democracy. He believes in America. He doesn't see, to quote my mentor, Melvin Van Peebles, trouble is just opportunity in work clothes. And he's the kind of guy who just says, you know what, we're going to vote, we're going to elect a good president, and we're going to change things, we're going to make things better. Unfortunately, when he goes to vote, it says that he is a convicted felon and cannot vote. And this has been happening all over the city. People who have been disenfranchised from voting. We can go to the next panel. Even Miss Jackson can't vote. Poor old Miss Jackson in her walker. And people go, are you for real? Yes, they are for real. So it becomes sort of contentious. The county sheriffs are brought in. Again, not the city police, the county sheriffs are brought in to quell the disturbance, because people know that people in East St. Louis are roughnecks. And it ends up in a typical, as you might expect, there's a riot, everyone's thrown into jail, including the mayor, and meanwhile the national election continues, and President Caldwell is elected by a very, very slim margin. By the way, people focus on the voter fraud in Florida, but I was talking with Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., who made the claim that actually there was a greater amount of fraud in the state of Illinois than there was in Florida. So not only, me picking East St. Louis is more apt than you might think. Let's go to the next panel. This is Kabila and the NAPS, the New African People's Party, which is a group of black Ivy League students who are committed to change. Is there a ripple of recognition? I don't know. They hear about the situation in St. Louis and doggone it, the Ballad of the Bullet and many other things they've read, and they want to take action. And we'll go to the next panel. And as Skip described, then Kabila's mom comes in with a plate of warm cookies. And the revolution is not canceled, just put on hold until the plate of cookies is finished. But that doesn't mean they're not serious. But there are other people who also see a window of opportunity in East St. Louis. It looks funny to me.
It's funny.
There's a character who, a very successful black billionaire. He owns a network, he owns an airline. His name is not Bob Johnson. His name is John Roberts. And the irony is there's a pair of there's the Roberts brothers in St. Louis who are black billionaires. And so, Mike Roberts called me and says, hey, is that me? I'm like, no. It's not you, and it's not that other fellow either. It's a completely fictional character. But in either case, John Roberts comes to East St. Louis in his private jet and sits down with the mayor and says, you know what, there's a huge opportunity here. We can go on to the next panel. And he brings along a colleague of his who works in the music business. And she's quite striking, she's quite beautiful, Donna, and together they sit down with the mayor and say, look, there's a way you can win. Obviously, being an American has done very little for you. So why continue? Secede from the United States. Form your own country. And of course, they're like, well, how's that going to work? And they said, well, here's exactly why it can work. And this came from me reading the New York Times several years ago. I was reading about these offshore banks. We can go to the next panel. And they convinced the mayor to do it. And he announces to the press that they decide that no taxation without representation. Democracy has been violated in America. If it doesn't mean anything, then why be an American? In the spirit of the American Revolution, they are seceding from the United States and they're forming their own country. We can move on to the next panel. There's a lot of pride, even among people who are not African American, like our man Habib, who works at the East St. Louis 7-Eleven, but very much identifies with being an East St. Louisan. He has a red, black, and green response as well. Next panel. Then there's a lot of drama in the White House because the president can't understand, that they've succeeded. And they keep going, well, they haven't quite succeeded yet. They're attempting. And go on to the next panel. And then the NSA chief explains that they did not succeed, they seceded. And the difference between the hard and the soft C and the implications thereof. And the president slowly understands what that means. Let's move on to the next panel. There's immediate talk of an invasion. Let's put these people in their place. And the Secretary of State steps in and explains that, look, the only people in East St. Louis who have jobs, either work for the post office or own some kind of welfare. So if we just cut them off, in 2 weeks the whole thing will be over. There's no need to escalate and cause a lot of drama. Let's just, let it play itself out naturally, and it'll resolve itself. Next panel. And sure enough, once the post office is closed, there's a lot of drama. And once the hospital was about to close, because again, all these things are dependent on federal funding, so suddenly East St. Louis, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, it does in fact get worse. Next panel. And then, the bank, the offshore bank that they're building has problems. Because, East St. Louis has a crime problem, as you may have heard. And this is based on a true story, the fence is stolen around the construction site. And the guard dogs are also stolen. There is a guard, and he's missing too. So they're having a problem building the resources they need in an economically depressed area. On top of that, Roscoe comes in. Roscoe is the leader of, what could broadly be called organized crime in East St. Louis. Now, I would argue one of the problems of Black America is that our crime isn't organized enough. But, he passes for, the criminal authority in East St. Louis. And they cut a deal with Roscoe. Since the police, aren't doing anything, most of them have left, and besides that, even before the secession, the police didn't have gas for their cars, their radios didn't work, again, based on real-life East St. Louis situations. That, the same way a lot of music groups hire the bootleggers to sell their T-shirts, they hire the gangs of East St. Louis to be the new police, which is not unlike how the New York police force got started with the Italian gangs. Moving on to the next panel. There's a series of nation time committees, because you have to figure out what's the name of their new country, what's the flag, what's the national anthem. So, there are people who sit in the committees just, looking at, different possibilities. The last one, go back, please. The last one there is sponsored by Nike. So, that comes with, with cash attached. Move on to the next. Finally, the offshore bank opens. Now, this is a big deal because obviously, if you look at the Cayman Islands, if you look at the Swiss, billions of dollars of transactions flow through these numbered bank accounts. So now that East St. Louis is no longer a part of the United States, it's basically a relationship, not unlike the Caymans or what Hong Kong is to China. So certainly, you can be a haven for all kinds of money, whether you're a corporate trader, or you're a husband about to get a divorce, or you're a Colombian drug dealer. This is a great place to park your money. And since it's within the continental U.S., it has all kinds of attractions. So suddenly, East St. Louis has billions of dollars pouring in. And if they take 3% off the top, in a year, they will be per capita the richest nation on earth. So now, all of a sudden, East St. Louis, which looked like a joke, is now looking like a serious contender.
Spring break capital of the United States.
Yes. One of the unfortunate gags we had to drop out is that, there's gambling and legalized drugs in East St. Louis as well, and the twin daughters of the president come to party there at spring break. Back at the Nation Time Committee, Prince is auditioning for the national anthem. People are, poo-pooing him. The old ladies are saying, we want Shirley Caesar. People are like, what about Stevie? Stevie ain't showed up yet. It's democracy in action, and we know what rule of mob means. Moving on to the next panel. Finally, a national flag is decided. It's red, black, and green with a picture of a blue-eyed Jesus on it. Because let's face it, when you're talking about community meetings, the only people that are showing up are old black people. And old black people love them some Jesus. And they want traditional Jesus. They don't want New Jack Jesus. They want old school Jesus.
Amen.
How true.
The
It's also a good defense against communism.
yes, indeed, yes. And it works out for them later. I mean, later some of the old black people go to the 700 Club and explain that they are, a good Christian nation, so, they shouldn't be hostile to them. So, there's certain arguments for it. The national anthem for Black Land, which is what it's called, which narrowly won out over Martin Luther King Land, is sung to the tune of Good Times. Black land, ain't you glad you got a country? black land, ain't you proud of feeling free? And again, it's kind of depressing, going to the next panel, that, with all the creativity that black people have, that we have such mediocre choices. But again, these are the joys and benefits of democracy. Meanwhile, Roscoe, the police force, is getting out of hand. He's now calls himself General Roscoe, and he's enforcing his own brand of justice. And you really should not jaywalk in East St. Louis. You might get kneecapped. It's a tough town. The same guys they were selling drugs to are now getting their butts kicked. But it's tough love justice in East St. Louis. Next panel. But the upsides is that they now have postal delivery and garbage delivery, and again, these are things that they barely had before. And they have a red, black, and green SUV to deliver that mail in. Moving on. Then the government realized this is pretty serious, so they shut off all the power grid to East St. Louis, which is plunged into blackness. So now they go, oh my God, what are we going to do? So they bring sort of these underground scientists, this guy from MIT, who are called wizards, who are into alternative fuel sources. And for example, and this is something that is a very real thing, I was talking to a guy who said, look, you're in East St. Louis, you're right there on the Mississippi River, you could run that city off of algae. There is currently existing technology to run the city off algae. There's all kinds of alternative fuel sources which Detroit and others buy up and sit on a shelf because you just don't want to disrupt the world economy like that. But these things are available, and since we're now our own nation, they avail themselves of these new technologies. Next panel. So and on top of that, East St. Louis now has an Air Force. Boogie Washington, one of the Air Force's Top Gun, decides to defect and takes his Raptor with him. So now East St. Louis is a nuclear power. Move on to the next panel. Again, the lights come back on. So now they are, energy free. They are armed to the teeth, and they have their own fully functioning economy. I'll move on to the next panel. So now it's deciding who's going to be on the money. Of course, Malcolm gets the 10. Come on. X, you get it.
Oh, Jesus.
Martin Luther King gets the 1. There's a shootout between two kids arguing who should get the nickel, Tupac, or Biggie. Moving on, and then it's decided to be given to Will Smith, of course, because everybody likes Will Smith. The leader of the Naps, Kabila, talks with the, Fred Fredericks, explains that, you can do more than simply be a small country. You can revolutionize how everything works. I mean, the fact that they are now energy free is just the beginning. You can revitalize education. The entire city could be Montessori schooling or some other, radical approach to education. That East St. Louis should be or Blackland can be a beacon to the world, a utopian showcase, because basically it's already as bad as it can get, so why not, experiment it, and be a great place for folks like yourselves at the K School and come and, do all kinds of social experiments. Next panel. Of course, there's, with all this success comes internal drama. Roscoe is approached by the CIA, and they say, look, why are you simply the general? Why don't you run the thing? And they set up a Lumumba-style military overthrow. The John Roberts character, when he hears about all these white sweeping social reforms, looks at the mayor like he's crazy, and is like, for him, this was supposed to be his ultimate for-profit venture. And the idea that they would peel off, $50 million on the actual people seems ridiculous to him. So now the alliance which pulled the thing together is now starting to fall apart. Moving on to the next panel. And so he's also John Roberts is also approached by the CIA, who offered to buy him off. He blows them off, saying, "Look, I'm going to make trillions of dollars off this. You know, what could you offer me that can be better than the deal I have right here?" The next panel, then they give the other motivation, which is a satellite from space, the geosynchronous orbital death ray, fires, next panel, and sends him a message. So, so John Roberts decides to exit the venture of Black Land. Next panel. The mayor assembles the community and announces that there's likely to be war, and they're going to be invaded by the United States. And that, you know, they would, you know, he would probably be hung for treason, and that, you know, at best the city would go back to how it was before, but at worst it could be another Panama City, which was, a lot of people don't remember the invasion of Panama, but a lot of black folk got put into unmarked graves on a large scale. So they asked people, what do they want to do? Do they want to wave the white flag now, or do they want to fight? And they decide to stand and fight. Next panel. And singing their, next panel, please. And they sing the national anthem of Black Land again. It's our land, so step off, Black Land. Next panel. So with the flag waving high, next panel, the invasion launches, but they have a counter plan. Donna goes to Saudi Arabia and cuts a deal with the Arabs that they will no longer use their alternative energy technology if they pressure the United States to back off. Next panel. The invasion happens. The Americans are coming. The Americans are coming. Next panel. There's a dogfight over East St. Louis. Ultimately, of course, is a happy ending, because when I do things, next panel, more important than anything else, niggas must win. So that's the broad strokes. There's a lot of jokes we left out. There's a lot of nuance. It's worth you checking out if you hadn't checked it out. But just wanted to give you the broad strokes of what the book is. And what we want to do is talk about not so much the book, but we want to talk about some of the ideas that we were trying to raise in the book, which is, is this book a good idea? Was it a good idea to put it in a book? Can we do this? Why can't we do this? Why shouldn't we do this? I don't know. I'm going to turn it over to the smart people.
Great, thank you. Okay, now our panelists will proceed in alphabetical order. Michael.
You must be skipping to somebody else. We're supposed to be going to the smart people. I'm not going to stand either. I'll stick with tradition as newly established. But I think I do want to make about 4 points, and the fourth point being a question. The graphic novel starts with a premise that happened in real life, at least some of us think it did, that African Americans were prevented from voting. And actually, I think the figure I heard from Chicago, where there are 100,000 votes out of the South Side, didn't get counted.
Really?
Yeah. For some reason, it never got into the national press, or 1 inch on page 27 of Section A of the Times. But the disenfranchisement in Illinois was massive, but it was also Tennessee, it was also Southern Illinois, it was across the country. And that's the premise with which the book starts, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I also want to explore what we do next, at least pose the question what we do next based on how African Americans are currently thinking about their relationship to this country. First, let me make something really, really clear in the few minutes that I have. One is that a good number of Americans believe that nothing happened in terms of disenfranchisement of African Americans. In fact, 40% when we polled in 2000 and when we polled last week, 40% of white Americans think that all the stories about black disenfranchisement are a creation of the Democratic Party. And 65% believed as of last week that if there were any problems, there were either no problems or they were minor. This is representative of the second point I want to make. Oh, and about 80 to 95% of African Americans believe there was a major problem, they're serious. And we asked about what's going to happen on Tuesday. 25% of white Americans again said that whatever charges come up next Tuesday are a fabrication of the Democratic Party. And again, about 65% don't expect any problems. About 3/4 of African Americans think there are going to be attempts to disenfranchise black Americans in this coming election. So what we have is a world where the majority of white Americans expect a free and fair election, and the great majority of African Americans expect their constitutional rights to vote and their voice to be severely attenuated, at least attempts made to attenuate voice and vote. That type of racial divide, the work that Larry Bobo and I have been doing over the past 4 years, is deepening, widening, and getting much more serious. It applies to not just how we saw the election in 2000. It extends to evaluation of President Reagan and his legacy, to how we view the current president, the war in Iraq. 3/4 of African Americans in this country think that if you believe the war is wrong, it's your duty to protest. 2/3 of white Americans believe it's unpatriotic to protest against the war. So systematically across a wide range of issues, it's not only that there are differences of opinions along lines of race, but we see two different worlds out there substantially. You take large numbers of African Americans and large numbers of white Americans, again, obviously not all, but there's still large racial divisions. And the third point I want to make is that everything I've seen, both semi-privately and what's publicly available, I think the skepticism that many African Americans have about what's going to happen next Tuesday is well-founded. A larger version of East St. Louis. I grew up in Chicago. We had the specters of Detroit on one side and East St. Louis and Gary on the other side. We felt surrounded by crazy black people because everybody knows that Chicago black folks are sane. But in Detroit, for example, a Republican state legislator said about a month ago that it was important for the Republican, he said this publicly, it was important for the Republican Party to suppress the Detroit vote. Black students at Prairie View were told that if they voted, they would be arrested. Yeah. In Florida, not only was there a new felon list composed that somehow had tens of thousands of African Americans, but less than 100 Hispanics on it. As we know, in Florida, Hispanics break overwhelmingly for the Republican Party. We also know that older black people in some counties in Florida were visited by the police saying that they were being investigated for voter fraud. In states from Ohio to Nevada, where there are recent reports of attempts to make sure that newly registered voters, mostly young, of all races, are not going to be allowed to vote, or at least there are going to be challenges to their voting. There's a BBC is reporting today, and this report has not been confirmed. There's some skepticism about it. The BBC is reporting that there's a list of 1,700 voters in Jacksonville who will be challenged when black people from black precincts that will be challenged when they go to the polls next Tuesday. So we can expect a fair amount of havoc, chaos around the attempts of African Americans and other people to vote next week. And the last thing I want to point out is the question that the book tries to answer, or at least lays out an alternative history. What should we do about it? Now, at this time, it's unlikely that African Americans are going to want to secede from the United States. And we asked this about a decade ago. 14% of African Americans want a separate black nation. That's a small percentage. Now, let me point out, it's also more than the people who identified as Republicans in that survey, despite what the Joint Center has to say. And your good friend, Carl. But what is true is that African Americans still have a very ambivalent relationship to this country, because over half of African Americans believe that African Americans constitute not another ethnic group, but a nation within a nation. Half of African Americans a decade ago believed there should be an independent black political party tied to neither of the two major parties. Now, during the Clinton years, those numbers sort of dwindled off. But what we've seen in the last year is a hardening of opinion among African Americans, where once again, where it gone down to about 1 out of 5 African Americans believe there should be an independent black political party at the end of the Clinton years, it's back up to 1/3. It's rapidly rising. the need for an independent black political party. African Americans overwhelmingly believe that African Americans should control the economic and political resources in their own communities, which is the heart of the political message of your story. African Americans are extraordinarily angry, even if they're extremely skeptical about Kerry. There's no question about that. But they're angry at the current president. And the question is, where do we go next? And I want to point out, I think there's two messages from Birth of a Nation, and it's good to bring that title back so that it can be used honorably once again. Thank you. One is that if we look at opinion, African Americans have believed for decades, if not longer, that there should be an independent black political organization, mobilization, and force. It's time to translate opinion into tactics, strategies, organization, and mobilization. And the second is the one feeling you get from the book, which you sort of get a hint of in the presentation that Reggie made, and a feeling that we're going to have to take with us is that, yes, we need to be realistic. As my good colleague saying to left me says, we need to be Machiavellian. Machiavellian says, you will not be taught in this Harvard government department, at least by some of its professors, whether Republican small r, he believed in strengthening the republic. We do need to be Machiavellian in that sense, and we need to be realistic. We also need, as Major Frederick and his compatriots were, we need to be optimistic. Because without a sense of political optimism, without a sense that there can be justice, without a sense that if black people are the miner's canary, to steal from my colleague on my right, Lonnie Guinier, this democracy is on its deathbed right now. Without a sense of optimism, we'll just give up. And that's the one message the book says is that's what we cannot do. That's the one thing we cannot do at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Flaherty.
Okay, I'm up.
That's you.
Yeah, again, on the smart people thing, I'll have to take a slide on that one as well. I kind of feel like Admiral Stockdale in the vice presidential debate when he said, "Who am I and what am I doing here?" I'm a big fan of Reggie's and a big fan of Jean's. As you mentioned earlier, I grew up one town from here, grew up in Arlington, didn't get into Harvard, and went to a safety school that was close by in the Red Line Tufts. And amen, all right. And so when I got out of there, started working a lot on education. And there was an area about 6 or 7 years ago, there's Cluster 6 is the worst public school district here in the city. And it has the lowest percentage of kids who are getting into the exam schools, which are one of the greatest chances of getting success. So we put together this curriculum for kids to work on the weekends and after school. It's not the best time when you're in 5th or 6th grade, you have other interests. So as a way to break the ice before jumping into mathematics and reading, and I would always ask kids, what are you reading? What are you watching on television to break the ice? And they'd always say, oh, I've been watching the weigh-ins, I've been doing this, I'm listening to this. And I started to realize that there's great opportunity if there's something you could do for popular entertainment and popular culture. It would be a great way to teach things and to get kids more excited about learning. You know, someone said if you fell asleep in an American classroom 200 years ago and you woke up today, nothing would have changed. We've been through all kinds of industrial revolutions, but it's the same thing. It's a teacher in front of a blackboard, you know, handing out, smelling the photocopied papers. So what I've really been dedicated to is trying to figure out a way to, how do you take films, how do you take television, how do you take music, popular culture, and get people more excited about it. And that's why I was so happy to come tonight, because I think what Reggie's done here is just absolutely amazing on a number of levels. But one anecdote in terms of how I met Reggie, when we were going around Hollywood, and we met a fantastic investor in Denver, whose name is Phil Anschutz, who's really committed to changing the culture and improving education. He's the only one that went along with this plan that we had in terms of trying to impact the education. But every agent in town, when they heard that there was money around, they came sniffing around and they said, I got a great idea for you. Here's something educational. Carnival Massacre 7. We can teach people how to avoid homicidal maniacs. And then I got another call. Someone said, I got a great idea. Do you like Orwell? I said, yeah, I like Orwell. They said, do you like Animal Farm? I said, oh, I like where this person's going. We can teach a lot about politics. And he said, we're going to do Animal Farm, but with humans. And I said, isn't that called life? So I was just about to quit, and Reggie's brother Warrington called me, and he said, hey, I've been reading about your school, Frederick Douglass School. Let's make a movie about Frederick Douglass. You know, let's make a movie about what's really going on. Let's do this. And so met Warrington, met Reggie. And ever since, we've really been trying to do something to make it happen. I think that, we've all read the New York Times op-eds, we've all read a lot about what happened in the last election, but I think, and very unscientific, and Professor, you could probably help me with that, I'd venture to guess that a graphic novel like this could have a greater impact on middle school and high school kids to finally get them interested and really get them energized, because one of the things is, I just heard a poll on the way over here, you were talking about optimism and talking about hope. If you start to look at some of these polls for some of these younger kids, they've pretty much given up, a lot of these kids, in terms of, can I become president? Can I do this? Can I do that? And there's just great despair. The other reason why I love what Reggie's done here with the graphic novel is it's really hard to get a film made. And I know that there are incredibly talented filmmakers here, but Reggie is being a classic entrepreneur here, and he's realizing that there's other ways to get the story told, and there's a lot more people in Hollywood talking about this now than they did when it was a treatment, because it's real, it's getting great reviews, it's making an impact, and it's doing a lot. And one of the things that I think that everyone should have in the back of their mind, there's a lot of talented storytellers here, and Reggie's one of them, and one of the more successful people in Hollywood right now. One of the greatest things that can be done is to figure out, how do you get these stories into people's hands? We've all heard about the great movies that were made, for $20,000, and they're going to change the world. The problem is it takes about $30 million to get those films out there. So just like the great protagonist you have in your book in terms of figuring out, if you really want to get these stories told and we really want to empower people, that distribution, that's a key thing to figure out. But I hope that we can head more in this direction in terms of graphic novels, just finding alternative ways and liberate learning from the classroom, because I think a lot of us have been to some of these schools in places like East St. Louis, and sadly, a lot of these kids just don't have a chance.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Lonnie Guinier.
So I want to refer to page 28 of this novel for those of you who have a copy. The bottom left-hand corner, there's comment, when black people get money, we're happy with a Bentley and a yacht. White men, they're not satisfied until they control their whole environment, and they'll risk everything to do it. That's why they run the world.
It is.
To me, that was the most important lesson of this particular book. What do you have to do to control your own environment? Mm-hmm. And can you do it in a way that allows you to exercise power, not necessarily to control the world, but to innovate or to create laboratories of experimentation that then excite other people to follow your model? And that's what I took as the message of this book, that this was not simply a fantasy about trying to create a black nation within the United States, but it was really a morality play in which the authors were invoking the image of black people finally doing something to try to control their environment as a message to all people, that we all have to act to try to control our environment. We have to, I thought your comment about education was perfectly appropriate, that we have to resist the notion that there are, quote, the smart people who know everything and we just have to sit and listen to them. You guys have a lot more hope, or I have a lot more hope that you guys will be changing the world than those of us who are sitting up here on the podium. And so I'm speaking for myself, obviously. So my first point is do something, right? And do something to change your environment, and do something to change your environment that's inspiring to other people to follow your lead. The second point is, well, what can you do? And to me, the second message is, and Michael has talked about this metaphor of the miner's canary, is really about using race as a diagnostic tool of the defects that are confronting all Americans. part of the problem, and I was really struck by the commentary that large percentages of white Americans believe the election is going to be fair. They think that all of the disenfranchisement of black voters is a fiction that was created by the Democratic Party. Well, part of that, I think, is the way in which race functions currently in our discourse. It is a decoy. It is something that we talk about, it's them, it's happening to them, and people just don't pay attention, and so they're not processing the information. Part of the challenge for those of us who want to act and do something to change our environment is to talk about these issues in a way that brings other people into the conversation. You think it's only black people who are being disenfranchised. What about all of those older Jewish people in Florida who are also disenfranchised? And for all of the black people who are disenfranchised, look at the rural white people who are disenfranchised. You have a situation in which one party is overtly acknowledging that it is hiring people, it is paying people to disenfranchise other people, and that's their goal. You can't have a democracy in which you only have two parties and one of them is about disenfranchisement. So to me, this is a challenge to use race not simply as a decoy, which is the pathologizing of the canary, but to see the canary in the mines as the diagnostic tool. When the canary is gasping for breath, that is a signal that the atmosphere in the mines is toxic for everyone. And we have to watch what's happening to the canary and use these kinds of graphic novels or other stories to alert us that the miners are also going to die if they don't change the atmosphere in the mines. So the first point is to do something to change your environment, and the second point is to use race and to use the lessons of race because they are visible, because they are, in some ways, the proxy, the symbol of exclusion, but to use those lessons as a prompt, as a motivator to change the atmosphere in the mines, to transform the mines, not just to make sure that some black people can vote. We need to do something, and I'm right along with Reggie, that is radical, that is transformative. And guess what it would be the first step? Have a national constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote. You may think, oh, in a democracy, that should be the first thing. We don't have a constitutional provision that guarantees all American citizens the right to cast a ballot for President of the United States. We have lots of amendments that are prohibitions on the states, and they are negative, meaning the state cannot deny you the right to vote if the state is granting other people a right under the state's prerogatives to determine time, place, and manner, to determine who can vote, et cetera. So we have a hodgepodge of laws, and we need some kind of commitment as a nation to the foundational idea that we are going to guarantee everyone the opportunity to participate in choosing our electors and choosing our government, because after all, that's what democracy is, rule of and by the people, not rule by states or by political parties, especially when one of them is devoted to disenfranchisement.
Thank you, Laura. And finally, Reverend Eugene Rivers.
He's the only one here who thinks he has the answers.
Thank you, Lonnie. That was a prescient observation. That was sharp. I am very thankful to Reggie for the morality play that has, as part of its subtext, a more fundamental philosophic question that is posed to black people that revolves around the issue that Lonnie alluded to, which has to do with the difference between autonomy. For me, I reject the notion of race because I think black people are a people and not a race. And I make And so I conceive of black people as a distinct people, a nation within a nation, which does not need the ideological language of race. I can talk about black people culturally, institutionally, politically, ideologically, so that the boogaboo of race and the race card can be dismissed, so that in the discussion of the questions in The Birth of a Nation deal with the philosophic and moral and cultural question of, do black people want to be autonomous, where they write checks as opposed to simply receiving them and functioning operationally as supplicants? And what's interesting about Reggie's proposal is that it is bipartisan. It is neither left nor right. It is neither Democratic or Republican, which is a major conceptual advance, because intellectually, historically, just in terms of the historiography of bipartisan politics in the United States, the Republican Party historically has no monopoly on voter suppression. And so this ahistorical view that somehow, because the guys in power who are suppressing, the electoral activity of black people, have a monopoly on this, I commend to your attention, for those of you that are under 30, the election of 1960, where the Democratic Party, at the behest of Joseph P. Kennedy, enlisted the services of Sam Mumu Giancana in Illinois with the able assistance of James Hoffa to systematically, suppress the rights electorally of any number of individuals in Illinois, in West Virginia, Texas, and New Orleans. In New Orleans, Carmen Marcello was the leading political activist who, at the behest of Kennedy money, actively worked through all forms of corruption. And in point of fact, and this is generally known in most informed intellectual and political circles, that Richard Nixon was robbed. And in fact, Watergate was a defensive response to the fact that Joseph Kennedy, with organized crime and corrupt labor, stole the election of 1960. And so what I found amusing, when everybody was aghast at Florida, I said, what's all the big, all the moralizing here, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, what they've done in 2000 is objectively, morally, and politically no different than what was done and is commonly understood in 1960. So let's be adult for a change in our intellectual discussion of the issue or the morality of this business, and stop playing these childish games as though any of the parties are any repository of some kind of transcendent utopian moral virtue. It's a lie. Let's get real with this thing, right? Let's talk like we're living in America, where it's rough and tumble, and America is ultimately at one level, a cross between Godfather 1, 2, and 3. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. But I mean, and the thing that's sort of amusing to me, when young black people you got this kind of keep it real rhetoric, you rock the rhetoric of keep it real and bring the most naive, almost mystical kinds of assumptions to how you think the game's supposed to go. No, I mean, the fix is in, that's the way the game is. And for me, frankly, what I'd be interested in, what is, quite, refreshing, and what Reggie does in a comic way, is he says, wait a minute, let's not be naive about this thing at one level. The fundamental philosophic, moral, and cultural question is whether or not black people want to build the kind of institutionally autonomous, forces, and because freedom is not free. You won't get it being a supplicant or ideologically aligning yourself with either party, who have no respect for you because you don't have the intelligence to engage in developing and advancing a diversified ideological and political portfolio. You stuck 98% of your eggs in one basket, and the other dude won, knocked the basket off the table, and all you could do was cry and be excluded. And you went from one form of political suppression to another form, and then you whined for 4 years, as though that man's supposed to take you seriously. Somebody say amen. Amen. It's true. You got jacked. So, come on, let's, so young people, if you want to get real, let's stop talking like children about this game, right? It's a hardball game, and and so let's, I saw a couple of my friends from Nigeria, right? How many Nigerians in the house? Oh, y'all know about hardball politics. Yeah, man. Y'all know about some hardball politics, right? So let's stop being, let's actually talk about the kinds of points that Professor Guinier raised. Listen, most of us really only do want a Benz and a little glitter and a little bling bling. We really don't want any fundamental, ultimate philosophic sense freedom. Not really, because freedom's expensive. It involves remarkable levels of sacrifice. And frankly, that's not what we're about. We want some high-wage gig, liquor soda large, with benefits and a good retirement plan. Y'all know that's right. Don't sit here looking confused. That's the bottom line, right? Don't be confused. And so for me, I think there's some philosophic, moral, and cultural questions where we move the discourse beyond this kind of childish left-right thing as though it matters. John Kerry ain't thinking about us. Only at the last minute did John pull Jesse Jackson out of mothballs and send him to you colored people preaching because of the presumption that you were to be viewed as a marginal factor. In fact, he completely distanced himself from you so he could get to the heartland of middle America. And you took the indignity without anybody publicly challenging the boy. Then you talk about the other man. Frankly, see, I'm going to say something really outrageous here, right? And I'm actually philosophically to the left of most of y'all in this room. I personally would like to see the other boy win just to dismantle the morally and ideologically corrupt infrastructure which has been on the dole by these other people and has resulted in you being impotent and powerless. So let's really mix it up. And the last point, you are not going to win. I'm going to bring this to the thing. You ain't going to win with an undiversified ideological and political portfolio. If the boy wins again, you stuck for another 4 years, and you ain't got no traction, access, or juice. Now, if you were smart, and this is basic arithmetic, and I'm an idiot and I know this, you'd mix the game up. There should be some folk that vote for Kerry. There should be a little bit of Bush action up in there. Then there should be some people that stay at home. So at least you're competitive. The man got to earn his vote as opposed to punking you all the time. Then you sit up here whining when you're going to be locked out again with some dudes who told you that to stay out the bushes while they worked on cutting their own deals. There you go. There you go. That's right. Get me going, Carl.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to open up the discussion to the floor. You have to take the mics. There's one mic there, one mic there. Kwame, get on over there. You're not Kwame, you're Lawrence. You're Lawrence, right. Hit the microphones. Sir, yes.
Yes, hello. My name is Stephen Ridgel. I'm a junior at the college. I found what Reverend Rivers had to say very interesting because I was, forgot exactly who had made the quote, but some Democratic politician, when asked about the black vote, very candidly said, "I don't want to buy the black vote. I just want to rent it for a day." So, what my question is the answer is an answer to this political impotency of Black America? Is it political diversity? And if not, can anyone refute that? And if so, can anyone sort of expand that idea, maybe delineate, specifically, in what way should we be diversified and why?
Sure, just before you respond, I'll open it up. Many of you know, but for those of you who don't, I think most people think it was W.E.B. Du Bois in 1920 who invented what he called the balance of power thesis, which was then picked up by Henry Lee Moon and Ralph Bunche in the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s by Chuck Stone in Black Political Power in America. Chuck Stone called it ceteris paribus, which is all things being equal. So if we could shift our votes, all things being equal, that is, if the larger electorate, Stone meant, Du Bois meant, all these other people meant the white electorate, but now it's much more complex than that. But if the larger electorate is evenly divided as it is, and we held back, what you're going to do for us, right? And you shifted beyond party to either Republicans or Democrats or even a third party, and could be the visible, demonstrable balance of power, then we would have more power than we have today. It's an old thesis, what he's saying. Michael.
As Reverend River knows, I come from a political family that knows a little bit about hardball.
Michael's great uncle was the congressman from Chicago in the United States House of Representatives for about 36 years, I believe.
Yeah,
and he ran the machine. Excuse me.
And yes, I do know where some of the bodies, I'm not talking metamorphically, are buried. But the point I want to make is that Reverend Rivers and I agree with an awful lot, although it doesn't usually sound like it.
He's smarter than I am.
You didn't think so 20 years ago, but you got more diplomatic since then.
I grew up.
But there's three things. I very much agree with him when he's talking about autonomy. I'm not sure I agree with a diversified politics. We need an independent, autonomous politics,
Agreed.
where we decide what we need and what direction we have to go.
Agreed.
The second thing I would say is that I totally agree. Both political parties don't care at all about the black vote, except to the degree that it produces margins on election days. And there's been stories in places like blackcommentator.com, which talks about the way that the Kerry campaign has totally mobilized to get the black vote out without having any accountability at all to black community, black political institutions, and the like. The third thing that I have to say, though, to be, having said the first two things, is where we do disagree, is I don't think we can survive 4 more years.
We're tough people. All right.
We might be a tough people, but 4 more years of Ashcroft and the elimination of civil liberties. I mean, I have tried to organize from the left the hard way under a near-fascist regime. It could get much worse than that you all are going to have to organize and find out what it's like. And I also don't believe that we can survive a war with Syria and Iran, which are definitely in the cards. So I do believe that we have to be realistic, tactical, and make strategic decisions, but we can disagree about what those decisions are.
Absolutely. Okay, Lonnie?
So I want to say that I think both Jean and Michael are talking in a very short-term way. That is, how do you cast your ballot a week from yesterday? Mm-hmm. And what I would like to put on the table is a long-term analysis. When I said that we have to think transformatively, it means changing the way in which politics is conducted in this country, because the option of voting for either of these candidates is not the ideal that we should be striving for. And we have to understand the way the structure of our particular democracy, and it is a set of choices that were made by a bunch of aristocrats who basically thought that elections were an opportunity to ratify the natural leaders of a community. So the election shouldn't even be highly competitive, because the idea was there's some people who, by virtue of character or learning, were obvious leaders, and they would concede the importance of allowing the rest of the population, as long as they own property, to cast a ballot affirming this natural talent. Now, many other democracies have come into being since ours and have improved upon that understanding. And if we had a system that actually allowed people to form political parties based on interest, to be autonomous, and then to act through that party to either support or deny support to various candidates and politicians, then I think that both Jean and Michael have a point. But we don't have that system. We have a winner-take-all system in which the winner gets all of the power, the loser gets nothing, and as a result, it's highly partisan, and neither of them is actually in a position to be held accountable, because they are essentially each carrying umbrellas, protecting themselves from different forms of bad weather. So I really think that this is a chance to transform our system. Think about South Africa, became an all-race democracy in 1994. They didn't follow what we do. They adopted a proportional representation system in which people vote for a party, not for a candidate, and then the party basically has a list of candidates, and then depending on the percentage of support that the party gets, that's the percentage of seats in the in the legislature that the party receives. And so in South Africa, you vote for the ANC, or you vote for the White Afrikaner Party, or you vote for the Inkatha Freedom Party, and that's a way of actually promoting the autonomy and the innovation and the independence that Reggie's book is metaphorically, I think, addressing.
Yeah. Reggie?
Yeah, I think, part of the drive behind the book is to shift people towards systemic change. Right. Obviously there's, the great social change that happened in the 60s and 70s happened because there were, a generation or two that was really focused on systemic change and made some huge gains. And of course, there was a counter reaction, and there was a series of assassinations, and people lost their taste for systemic change because the message got clear. If you do that, we will kill you. I don't care if you're the president, we will kill you. So, that desire for change never went away, the desire to help people, and I think what you've seen over the past several decades is people, whether it's working, for people with AIDS or working with the homeless, the people's desire to help their neighbor and do good hasn't gone away. No. But people have stopped thinking about the big picture. And it's like a slave revolt. It's like, it takes a generation or two and they forgot how bad the slaughter was, so then they get bold again, and then you have a bigger slave, rebellion than the previous one. I think it's time for this generation to step up and think about systemic change.
Mm-hmm. Let's. No, I think we have to move on. Sorry, we're running out of time. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Lawrence Odger, the president of the Harvard Black Students Association.
Mm-hmm.
I have two main questions.
Tilt the mic up.
All right, sorry. I have two main questions. First, initially to Reggie, and then to the rest of the panel, and to kind of take it back to the book. When you came up with the title Birth of a Nation, of course, a lot of us might think about the D.W. Griffiths piece, Birth of a Nation. And my underlying question to you is, how much did you model this piece against that movie? And why I bring this up, and what Professor Grenier was talking about, is the power of portrayal and the power of discourse. Mm-hmm. And when I think back to the D.W. Griffiths piece, you think about how a movie could actually romanticize the insurgents of the Ku Klux Klan. And that was just, wow, the power of portrayal. It could romanticize such a hateful group. And kind of thinking about the discourse of race, do you think, kind of discourse of race has to kind of be portrayed in such an extreme for it to change? And what concretely, for everybody, what concretely can we do to change the discourse on race?
We got it.
Right.
Thank you.
We had a lot of debate over the title. The original working title was Fight the Power, based on both the Public Enemy and the Isley Brothers song. But I just thought, that marginalizes us. And I thought, if you name it after a hip-hop song, people go, oh, it's a hip-hop book. And you kind of, I said, if you call it Birth of a Nation, it's the most provocative title you could come up with. At the same time, it accurately describes what the book is about. It is about, in fact, the birth of a nation. And also very personal for me, I studied film here at Harvard. I saw Birth of a Nation at Carpenter Center, and I remember sitting there as a freshman, and the rest of my classmates enjoyed the film thoroughly. They were laughing and amused and thought it was very cute, up until, I guess, 2/3 through the film, where there's a title card where it goes, North and South join together to protect their common Aryan heritage. And suddenly it was like, hey, what the hell's with this movie? It was like, oh, now it ain't so funny. And so, it was a brutal experience to be a freshman. And, I'm from East St. Louis. I don't mind fighting. But it's one of those situations where you find out very early in, it's like, wow, this place, these people are, they're not for you. So I definitely wanted to take that title, use it for my own purposes. Hopefully, I kept hoping that someone would sue us over the title. That would be the ideal. I was willing to pay someone, like, hey, you're from, the family. Anyway, so I wanted to take the title, transform it. I didn't use any of the plot of Birth of a Nation at all. That would be a whole other thing to do. There were a lot of films that did influence us. I mean, movies like The Mouse That Roared, Doctor Strangelove, Wag the Dog. I mean, there's a whole tradition of that kind of social satire. And there's a movie I never actually saw, but I made Aaron watch, A Passport to Pimlico, which is about a small part of London that secedes. So, I mean, that, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. Obviously, particularly in the 60s and 70s, there's a whole tradition of people playing with those kind of notions in broad comedies. And the idea was to introduce, I mean, with almost every film I make, is to introduce ideas not by preaching to the converted, by speaking to folks that aren't prepared, who aren't expecting a message, and kind of sneaking it in so that it actually dissolves in. And a big part of it, in terms of icons and ideas, I realized when I was in a honky-tonk country and western bar in Texas, shooting a movie, which is just a hell of a place to be. You're there in the country and western bar in Texas. I said, I'm in the belly of the beast. I'm in the mix. And they had these huge murals on the wall of all these cowboys. And I realized, wow, they have folk heroes that have a gun, and their gun is to enforce the law that they made up. And we don't have that. Our greatest heroes are outlaws, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And obviously not putting them down, but except for Nelson Mandela, we don't have a hero that created law, that laid down and defended the law. And I just thought it's time for us to create a new, that's the kind of iconography we need for the 21st century. I was actually, better name drop, I was talking to Quentin Tarantino last week, and we were talking about making Southerns, which are like Westerns, but down south.
That'd be great.
And he wanted to do one about by the name Django. Django gonna be kicking some ass, But that's what it's about. It's about, thank you. That's my favorite line in the book too. It's about taking control of your environment, taking control of the world around you. And so if we see it, if we dream it, we can be it.
Sir, up there.
Yeah, Kurt Summers from the business school, and more importantly, from the great city of Chicago. My question is to Professor Guarnier. You brought up the call for the constitutional amendment for the universal right to vote. I know Congressman Jackson, some other folks have been pushing pretty heavily for this. And my question to you is, why hasn't it happened? And what will it take to happen for this audience, and how we can help?
Well, he's been talking about it, but apparently the Democratic Party was reluctant to endorse any constitutional amendments this year in light of their opposition to the constitutional amendment to make marriage exclusively between a man and a woman. They didn't want to confuse the American people by having a constitutional amendment protecting the right to vote and a constitutional amendment, which they presumably would support, at the same time that they were saying we shouldn't be amending the Constitution on issues of marriage, which they are opposed to. So, but that's the short story. The long story is that we have a tradition of localism in this country, and an assumption that it is up to the states to protect the franchise, and that the federal government only intervenes when those states exceed their constitutional power by denying people the franchise. So there's no affirmative protection of the right to vote. Why hasn't it happened? Because many people in this country, I'm sure if Michael did polls of whites and blacks, they would think that the Constitution was perfect when it was when it was first signed, even though it essentially protected slavery. So many people in this country have a view of our constitutional democracy as one that was perfect from its inception, and therefore there's very little that really needs to be done. And I think we need to begin to question that, and that is a mythology, that democracy began in the United States, and that if it didn't begin here, we perfected it. Democracy did not begin here, and we have a long way to go. So what can you do? I think that raising this issue, asking people, why isn't there an affirmative constitutional right for all American citizens to cast a ballot? And contact Representative Jackson's office and sign the petitions, or contact your local representatives and ask them to sign their name onto his bill.
Thank you, Lonnie. Before we take that gentleman there, Karen, what time do we have to stop? Beg your pardon? We can't hear you. Could we have 10 minutes? How much time do we have? 5 minutes? 2 more questions. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Kwame Usukesi, and I'm president of Harvard Black Men's Forum. My question is for Mr. Flaherty and Mr. Hudlin. What role do you see popular culture taking in serving this new role as a catalyst of this new political optimism?
Hollywood's all about money, which Reggie can tell you. So you just have to, just like the point that we keep talking about, the actual proves the possible. So if they can see that there's money to be made in projects like this, we'll see more of them. For the last 20 years, Taylor Hackford's been trying to make a movie about Ray Charles. And the basic economics about the way Hollywood works is a small portion of your money actually comes from the US theatrical box office. You make most of your money overseas. So what happens is you have an Academy Award winning director like Taylor Hackford, an American icon like Ray Charles you're going to make a movie about, and then some bean counter, 2 years out of college at a studio says, you know what, you're never going to make your money out of foreign on this one, we shouldn't make it. So it's not about art, it's about widgets. But they made it. My boss actually stepped up and they said, you could lose tens of millions of dollars. And he said, yeah, but I could also make a great movie, and isn't that the point? And so hopefully, this weekend we'll get some good box office. It's funny because on Saturday morning, like Reggie will tell you, that's when people will say whether it worked or didn't, 18 hours after the release of the film. Yep. But that's what, hopefully, I think that one's gonna go well, and then you'll start to see, hopefully, that will turn around.
Yeah, I mean, I can't recommend highly enough that you all go see Ray, because it's a really amazingly good film. And even if you weren't here, I'd say that. I've been saying that.
Thanks, Rich. I've been saying about your book, too.
But the tragedy is that Ray could, make $100 million this weekend, and it would not change the way numbers are analyzed in Hollywood. I mean, as he says, I wish that it was, a green decision and not a black and white decision. Unfortunately, in Hollywood, black only counts in the negative. So if a film fails, it's because it's a black film. If a film is a hit, well, because, Eddie Murphy's in it, or Queen Latifah's in it, or whatever. It's not really a black film. So, there's a numbers game played so that the numbers really don't count. And ultimately, aside from wonderful exceptions like Michael and his financier, there aren't places to even have conversations like this, because they will look at you like you were crazy. Because it's not like they sit around thinking about how to suppress black people or black product. They don't care. We are beneath contempt. So, so when you go, hey, here's a movie, it'd make a lot of money, it'd be really funny, they go, I'm not thinking about this. They don't care. So what I've been doing for the past 15 years is tricking people. What I describe my job as, I hit people over the head, wrestle them to the ground, and force money into their pockets. That's my job. And I'm getting tired. So, I'm thinking about doing something else. I don't know what that is yet.
Being a professor at Harvard.
No. I'm thinking about how to build an institutional response to institutional racism. Because obviously, if they're not making movies that can make a lot of money, then that's money for me to make.
Yeah, that's true.
So the point is, don't whine, don't complain.
Just do it.
Pull up your goddamn socks.
Right. Last question. I want everybody to notice Brandon graciously sat down so that you could ask the final question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Monica Clark, and I'm a news editor for the Harvard Crimson here at the college. And It seems to me that
Amen,
novels.
amen.
It seems to me that novels such as *Birth of the Nation* and *Noise* about the Bush administration and the controversy in Florida succeed in creating a spark in Black people to action. But my question is, how much do you want your novel to also reach out to white audiences? And how important is it also to change the perceptions of whites? Or is it enough to just continue to focus on mobilizing Black youth and Black people to action?
Look, thank you. I want everyone to read it. And it's not a black-white conversation either. It's a black, white, Latin, Asian conversation. And, you know, I think one of the giant mistakes that we as a community do is that we don't connect intraracially. Because, you know, and that's just wrong. But no, the book is for everybody. You know, I mean, Eugene put it very well. It's not about race. It's about, like, here's what's right. We have to have objective moral stance. We have to have, you know, some sense of what's right and what's wrong. I mean, again, to me, that's the great success of Nelson Mandela. You know, it wasn't about being reactive. That horrible story, you know, you just said about the Democratic Party, it's like they're being reactive to the Republicans, which is why there are always some punk-ass losers. Instead of going, look, here's our agenda of what's going to make a great America. Because that's a big part of white people who vote Republicans. It's like, they're not punks. They're voting for the non-punks. It's like, you come off strong, you come correct, people respond to that. That's called leadership. You want some Me Too, whiny punk-ass stuff, well, you end up like punks do in second place. You know, you need to punch the villain and get the girl. Keep it moving. So I want everyone to read the book. That's my answer.
Michael Dawson.
One thing I was going to say, if you look at our history, the time that we've been able to most reach out to other races is when we're organized. I mean, this was a point that Charles Hamilton and at the time Stokely Carmichael, later known as Kwame Ture, made, that people listen to you when you're organized and you have something to say and something to bring to the table. And if you look at all the great Black social movements and their leadership, there were about two things: organizing Black communities and talking to whomever they would talk to them. And the combination would often lead to the type of systemic change that Lonnie's advocating.
A last word? Lonnie, Michael, or Gene?
Amen.
Amen.
No, A women.
You can't put that way. That way you're not going to be. You got Gene. That's right. A women.
So what do you feel like?
I feel, well, let's go somewhere around here would be great for me.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
And I could go for that burger place if you're going to move for that, or if there's another place. Yeah.
I think it's still